If you hit all these bottles, you'll win an Apache girl. The cowboy accepted the challenge, and the sun hung low over the small frontier town of Dust Creek, casting long shadows across the wooden buildings and dry, sandy streets. It was the kind of town where life moved slowly, but when something unusual happened, everyone noticed. Today, the townspeople sensed that something big was about to unfold. The old saloon at the edge of Main Street with its swinging doors and creaking sign had been buzzing with rumors all morning. By late afternoon, the chatter had grown into a hum of excitement. People were gathering not just for drinks, but for a story they knew they would remember for years. Cole Dawson rode into town on his black stallion, Dusty, the horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with every step. Cole was a man in his early 30s, lean but strong, with eyes that had seen more of the harsh western plains than most people could imagine. His worn leather hat shaded a face weathered by the sun and wind, and his long coat flapped slightly in the breeze. Though he rarely sought attention, there was something about him that drew curious glances wherever he went. Children would peek from behind barrels, and even the gruffest cowhands would tip their hats as he passed. The saloon door swung open with a familiar creak, and Cole dismounted Dusty, patting the horse gently before leading it to the hitching post. Inside the saloon was a swirl of noise. The smell of strong coffee and whiskey mingled with the smoke from the few candles that had been lit to fight the creeping shadows of evening. Card tables were crowded with men playing poker and dominoes, their laughter and groans echoing off the walls. A piano player was attempting a lively tune, though he kept glancing nervously toward the back of the room, where the action was about to unfold. In the corner stood old Hank, the rancher who had issued the challenge. He was a large man with a round belly that shook when he laughed, and a voice that carried over the din of the saloon. His eyes sparkled with mischief and confidence. He had lined up several glass bottles along the bar rail, each one balanced carefully, and announced loudly, "If any man can hit all these bottles, he'll win the favor of Little Raven, the finest Apache girl in all these lands." The room fell silent for a moment, but then murmurs spread quickly. Some men chuckled, some frowned, and others leaned forward, intrigued. Little Raven, the girl in question, sat near the back of the saloon, her long dark hair tied neatly with a ribbon, her eyes calm but alert. She had grown up in the land surrounding Dust Creek, respected and admired for her intelligence and courage. Though the challenge was aimed at her, she did not look pleased. She quietly observed Cole, who had stopped just inside the door, his eyes scanning the bottles lined up on the bar. There was no fear in her expression, only curiosity and a hint of amusement. She had heard of Cole Dawson before, how he could hit distant targets that seemed impossible, and how he never wasted words or time. Cole stepped closer to the rail, his boots tapping softly against the worn wooden floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. Children pressed their faces against the edges of tables, while the older men leaned in, some muttering about luck and skill, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Cole's calm demeanor contrasted with the tension in the room. He bent slightly, examining the bottles. They varied in size, some small, others larger, each placed carefully but precariously on the edge of the bar. A single wrong move and they could fall, ruining the challenge. Old Hank clapped his hands together and called out, "Now, Cole Dawson, show us what you're made of. Hit them all, and the reward is yours." The crowd erupted into cheers, whistles, and bets. Some men wagered coins, others promised services or favors. The air was thick with anticipation. Cole felt the weight of all eyes on him, yet he remained steady. This was more than a simple game of skill. It was a test of courage, precision, and self-control. As he raised his revolver, the saloon seemed to quiet down. Even the piano player had stopped, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Cole's mind wandered briefly to the many times he had trained alone on the open plains, shooting at cans, rocks, or distant bottles just for practice. Each challenge had taught him patience and focus, but none had carried the stakes of today. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation and the calm that came from experience. He could hear the whispers among the crowd. "Do you think he can do it?" asked one man nervously. "He's fast, but the last bottle is tiny," replied another. "Even the best can fail when the pressure's high," muttered a third, tipping back his chair. Cole ignored them all. For him, it wasn't about proving himself to the town or winning bets. It was about rising to the challenge. He knew that skill alone would not be enough. He needed concentration, patience, and control over his own nerves. Little Raven's eyes followed him carefully. Rasp. She had seen many men try to impress her, some with bravado, others with reckless skill. Most failed, and she had learned to keep her respect guarded. But there was something different about Cole. He didn't show off. He didn't speak unnecessarily, yet there was confidence in his stance, a quiet strength that drew attention without demanding it. She wondered whether he understood what the wager truly implied. Not just a test of aim, but a test of character. Cole crouched slightly, aligning his first shot. The crowd leaned in, collectively holding their breath. He had learned that each shot required a clear mind, a steady hand, and careful measurement. One mistake, one twitch, and the bottles could tumble before he even finished. He remembered his days alone in the mountains, the countless hours of practice and the lessons taught by failure. Each miss had been a teacher, each success a reward. Today, all of that preparation would be put to the ultimate test. Old Hank whistled, a signal for Cole to begin. The first bottle gleamed in the warm glow of the saloon's lanterns, perfectly round and fragile. Cole's finger hovered lightly on the trigger. He could feel the weight of the revolver, the grip familiar in his hand. Time seemed to slow for a moment. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat. And then, with a smooth, precise motion, he fired. The shot rang out, echoing in the saloon, and the bottle shattered perfectly, sending tiny shards glittering in the light. A cheer erupted. The first bottle had fallen, and the crowd's excitement surged. Some clapped, others whistled, and a few even jumped to their feet. Cole didn't smile or celebrate. He simply lowered the gun slightly and focused on the next bottle. The challenge had begun, and he knew that the hardest shots were still ahead. The little Raven's expression remained composed, though a faint glimmer of intrigue appeared in her eyes. The stakes were high, the atmosphere electric, and Cole Dawson had just taken the first step toward an unforgettable test of skill, courage, and the mysteries of the frontier. After Cole's first shot shattered the bottle perfectly, the saloon erupted with cheers and applause. The excitement in the room grew even stronger than before, like a wave rolling through the crowd. Men and women pressed closer to the bar, leaning over tables, their eyes fixed on the line of bottles still waiting. Even the piano player had started tapping lightly on the keys again, adding a lively rhythm to the tension that filled the air. Cole stood steady, his gaze fixed on the bottles ahead, knowing that the challenge had only just begun. The second bottle was slightly smaller than the first, perched a little farther down the rail. Cole's mind cleared, pushing aside the noise of the crowd. He remembered the countless hours he had spent on the open plains, practicing his aim on cans and bottles of all shapes and sizes. Each practice had taught him patience and control, and now all of that experience would be put to the test. He lifted the revolver slowly, his hand steady despite the pressure from the crowd. Little Raven's eyes followed him intently, watching not just his skill but his composure. She had seen many men try to impress her before, but most were loud, brash, or impatient. Cole, however, was calm. He seemed to measure every movement, every breath. There was a quiet confidence in the way he handled the gun that drew the attention of even the most skeptical onlookers. Breaths. Some whispered to each other, "He's not just lucky, he knows exactly what he's doing." Others frowned, unsure if even skill could help him with the more difficult bottles ahead. Cole exhaled slowly and aimed at the second bottle. The distance was tricky, and the bottle wobbled slightly on the edge of the rail. A single miscalculation could send it falling too early, or cause the bullet to miss entirely. He steadied his hand, focused on the tiny target, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out sharply. Bottles shattered into pieces, the sound echoing off the wooden walls, and for a moment, the room fell silent in disbelief, before exploding into applause again. Cole had hit the second bottle perfectly. The crowd's excitement intensified. Men who had been leaning back in their chairs now leaned forward, eyes wide with anticipation. Children pressed closer, trying to catch a glimpse of the next shot. Even old Hank, who had issued the challenge, could not hide his astonishment. He scratched his beard and muttered, "I didn't think he'd make it this far. Maybe he really can do it."
Cole didn't smile or celebrate.
He simply moved his gaze to the next bottle, understanding that the challenge was far from over. The third bottle was smaller still, and it sat on a section of the rail that had been unevenly worn over time. The wobble made the shot much more difficult, and the saloon seemed to hold its collective breath. Cole crouched slightly, measured the distance, and calculated the angle. Every small detail mattered. He remembered lessons he had learned from failures in the past, how impatience could ruin even the simplest shot, how excitement could cloud judgment. He took a deep breath, cleared his mind, and fired. The bullet struck true, sending the third bottle into sparkling shards. The crowd erupted once more, cheering louder than ever. Little Raven leaned forward slightly, her interest growing. She had expected Cole to be skilled, but the precision and calm with which he handled the challenge impressed her. There was no recklessness, no unnecessary bravado. Every shot was measured, every movement deliberate. She found herself wondering if this man's skill extended beyond marksmanship, if his mind and heart were as steady as his hand. Cole paused for a brief moment, checking the revolver and aligning his stance for the fourth bottle. This one was particularly small and placed near the edge of the rail, wobbling dangerously. The risk of missing or causing a chain reaction that might knock over other bottles was high. He could feel the tension in the room like a physical weight pressing on him. The crowd grew silent, knowing the difficulty of the next shot. Even old Hank, who had set the challenge, looked tense as he muttered to himself, "This is where most men fail." As Cole focused on the fourth bottle, he felt the familiar rhythm of training and practice take over. Remembered days spent under the hot sun, practicing his aim on the open plains, learning how to adjust for distance, wind, and the slightest movement. The lessons of patience, persistence, and calmness guided him now. He took a slow, steady breath and squeezed the trigger. The fourth bottle shattered into tiny pieces, and a cheer went up that shook the very walls of the saloon. Cole lowered the revolver slightly, his face calm, but inside, he felt the growing weight of the challenge. The next few bottles increased in difficulty. Some were smaller, others placed further apart, some perched dangerously close to the edge. The tension in the room grew with every shot. Men whispered to each other, betting small coins or goods, while children gasped at the sight of each shattered bottle. Cole moved deliberately from one target to the next, his focus unwavering. Each time a bullet hit its mark, the crowd erupted in excitement. Yet Cole's expression remained calm, his mind clear and steady. With each successful shot, the stakes grew higher. The crowd could feel it. The final bottles were going to be the hardest. Cole had shown skill and precision beyond expectation, but the challenge was far from over. Little Raven watched quietly, her respect for Cole growing. She could see the strength of his focus and the calm determination in his eyes. It was clear that this was more than a simple test of marksmanship. It was a test of courage, patience, and control under pressure. The atmosphere in the saloon was electric. Men and women leaned forward, holding their breath for each shot. The air seemed thick with tension, yet filled with excitement and anticipation. Cole's reputation as a skilled sharpshooter had preceded him, but now everyone realized that what they were witnessing was truly extraordinary. He was not just relying on luck. He was demonstrating a mastery of skill honed through years of practice and experience. As Cole prepared for the next set of bottles, he could feel the weight of expectation pressing on him. Each shot was a careful calculation, a balance of skill and concentration. The room seemed to quiet, the crowd watching in awe as he took aim. He remembered the lessons of his life, lessons of patience, control, and determination. Every shot was a chance to prove not just his ability with a gun, but his strength of character. Finally, Cole reached a momentary pause. He glanced at little Raven, who met his gaze with a calm but questioning look. There was no fear in her eyes, only interest. He knew that the challenge was about more than impressing her or winning a bet. It was about demonstrating skill, patience, and honor. And with that thought, he raised the revolver once more, preparing for the next shot that would bring him closer to completing the challenge. The fourth bottle had fallen, and the crowd's cheers echoed like thunder in the dusty walls of the saloon. Cole Dawson's eyes moved down the line of bottles, each one smaller and farther apart than the last. The excitement was electric, yet an unspoken tension had crept into the room. Everyone in Dust Creek could feel it. This was no ordinary challenge. It had become a test of nerves as much as of skill. The remaining bottles seemed to dare Cole to fail, and he felt their weight in a way that was almost tangible. Cole adjusted his stance carefully, keeping his feet steady on the wooden floor. He took a slow breath, letting the calm he had cultivated over years of practice settle over him like a shield. Every muscle in his body seemed to focus on the moment. He had learned long ago that panic was the enemy of precision. If he allowed the noise of the crowd, the excitement, or the pressure of the wager to cloud his mind, the smallest mistake could send the challenge crashing down.
He reminded himself that this was not about impressing anyone. It was about concentration, patience, and steady hands.
Little Raven, watching from her quiet corner, leaned forward slightly. Her dark eyes followed each movement of Cole's hands, each subtle shift in his posture. She had seen skilled men before, men who relied on speed and bravado. But Cole was different. He moved with calm intent, as if each shot was part of a carefully practiced dance. She admired that kind of focus and discipline. In her own life, she had faced challenges that required courage and patience, and she recognized a similar spirit in him. The fifth bottle was small, no larger than a teacup, and perched dangerously close to the edge of the rail. The slightest misstep could topple it or knock other bottles down, spoiling the sequence. Cole's eyes narrowed as he measured the distance, factoring in the wobble, the angle, and even the slight tilt of the bar. He had faced difficult shots before, but this one required more than skill. It required perfect judgment. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the children, who usually giggled and whispered, were silent, their wide eyes fixed on the target. Cole lifted the revolver carefully. The metal felt familiar in his hands, a trusted extension of himself. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady and calm, as if marking the rhythm of the moment. Slowly he aimed, taking into account every detail. He recalled the countless hours spent on open plains, practicing alone with bottles and cans, learning to adjust for wind, distance, and the tiniest movement. Every shot, he reminded himself, was a result of training, focus, and patience. He fired. The bullet hit true, shattering the fifth bottle into a spray of sparkling glass. The sound was sharp and crisp, and the crowd erupted in applause once more. Some cheered wildly, slapping each other on the back, while others simply watched in awe.
Old Hank, the man who had issued the challenge, rubbed his eyes in disbelief.
He had expected Cole to succeed on 1 or 2 bottles, but to make it this far was extraordinary. Yet Cole did not pause to celebrate potential. He knew the difficulty was only going to increase. The next bottles were smaller, farther apart, and more precariously balanced than any he had faced so far. The challenge that had begun as a test of skill was now a test of endurance, focus, and nerve. The saloon seemed to shrink around him, but cheering faded slightly, replaced by a tense silence as everyone waited to see if he could continue. The 6th bottle was tiny, no larger than a thimble, sitting on a section of the rail that was uneven and wobbly. Cole crouched slightly, feeling the weight of the moment. One wrong move, one twitch of the hand, and the bottle would fall without a shot. He steadied his breath, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat and the pulse of the crowd fade into the background. This was no longer about winning a wager or impressing someone. It was about skill, control, and proving to himself that he could rise to the challenge. Little Raven's gaze did not waver. She admired the quiet confidence that Cole displayed, the kind that comes from true mastery of one's abilities. She had faced her own challenges in life, moments that tested her courage and wisdom, and she understood the strength it took to remain calm under pressure. She found herself hoping that Cole would succeed, not because of the wager, but because she respected the discipline and focus he demonstrated. Cole raised the revolver slowly, aiming at the 6th bottle. He adjusted slightly, careful not to disturb the balance. His finger pressed lightly on the trigger, and with a steady pull the shot rang out. The bottle shattered perfectly, the tiny pieces sparkling in the lantern light like stars falling from the sky. The crowd gasped, then erupted into wild applause. Cole lowered the revolver but did not smile. He knew the hardest shots were still ahead. The 7th bottle was even smaller, placed at the very end of the rail where it teetered dangerously. A miscalculation could send the bullet too high or too low, causing a chain reaction that might topple several bottles at once. Cole's mind was calm, but his senses were sharp. He measured every angle, every distance, every tiny wobble. He could hear the whispers around him, some encouraging, some doubting, but they did not distract him.
He had learned to ignore noise and focus on the task at hand.
He fired. The 7th bottle shattered into sparkling fragments, and the crowd erupted into a frenzy of excitement. Children clapped and cheered, cowhands whistled and stomped their boots, and even old Hank looked stunned. Cole had passed the midpoint of the challenge with skill and precision, yet he knew the danger was growing. The final bottles were smaller still, and the tension in the room was nearly unbearable. The 8th bottle sat precariously close to the edge, almost as if daring Cole to miss. He crouched slightly, taking care to maintain his balance and focus. He reminded himself that every shot mattered, that even the smallest mistake could undo everything he had achieved so far. Breaths. He focused on his breathing, slowing it, letting the calm he had cultivated over years of practice wash over him. Every eye in the saloon followed his movements, waiting for the next shot. With a careful, steady motion, Cole raised the revolver and fired. The 8th bottle exploded into a cascade of glittering shards. A cheer went up so loud that the windows rattled. People clapped, shouted, and hugged each other in excitement. Cole did not flinch or smile. He simply moved on, understanding that the challenge was not yet over. The last few bottles were the trickiest, and they would require more than skill. They would require nerves of steel. The saloon had become completely silent in anticipation of the next shot. The final bottles were smaller, balanced on the very edge of the rail, and the pressure in the room was almost tangible. Cole adjusted his stance, feeling the weight of every eye on him, the expectation of every person in the room. He could see little Raven's eyes on him, calm but curious, and he understood that this was more than just a test of aim. It was a test of patience, courage, and control. Cole took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat, the calm focus that had brought him this far. He raised the revolver, steadying his hand with absolute precision. The 9th bottle glimmered in the lantern light, tiny and fragile. With one careful pull of the trigger, the bottle shattered into sparkling fragments. The crowd erupted into wild cheers, but Cole's mind was already on the 10th bottle. He felt the weight of the moment more than ever. The final bottle was the smallest of all, perched on the very edge, almost impossible to hit without disturbing the others. Psst. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the piano player had stopped playing. Every eye followed Cole's movements as he crouched slightly, raised the revolver, and prepared for the most important shot of the challenge. The tension in the saloon had reached its peak. Cole Dawson stood before the final bottles, the most difficult, tiny and precariously balanced on the edge of the worn wooden bar. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, every person in Dust Creek holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Children pressed closer to the tables, their eyes wide, and even the men who had laughed at the wager earlier now watched in awe. The excitement had turned into nervous energy, as if the entire town was waiting to see if Cole could complete what seemed impossible. Cole adjusted his stance carefully, feeling the familiar weight of the revolver in his hands. The metal felt steady and reassuring, and he reminded himself of all the training and experience that had brought him here. Every shot he had taken before had been a lesson in focus and patience. The previous bottles had tested his skill, but these final ones would test his nerve and precision to the utmost. He knew that one slip could ruin everything. He glanced at little Raven, who sat quietly, her eyes calm but alert. She did not smile or speak, but there was a spark of interest in her gaze. But Cole understood that this challenge was more than a test of marksmanship. It was about demonstrating courage, control, and respect for the skill itself. The 9th bottle was small, almost delicate, and perched dangerously close to the edge. Cole crouched slightly, measured the distance carefully, and slowly lifted his revolver. The room seemed quiet even more, the collective heartbeat of the crowd slowing in anticipation. He took a deep breath, feeling the calm wash over him, a calm he had cultivated through years of practice and experience. This was a moment of truth, and he would not let pressure or excitement dictate his actions. With steady hands and unwavering focus, Cole fired. The bullet struck the bottle squarely, sending it shattering into tiny, sparkling pieces. The sound echoed sharply through the saloon, and the crowd erupted into applause. Men slapped each other on the back. Children jumped in excitement, and even the piano player started a lively tune again. Cole, however, did not celebrate. His eyes moved immediately to the final bottle, the smallest and most precarious of all. The room seemed to hold its breath, aware that the hardest part of the challenge had arrived. The 10th bottle teetered on the very edge, nearly impossible to hit without upsetting the balance of the others. The slightest error would send it and possibly several of the remaining bottles crashing to the floor. Cole felt the weight of the moment like a tangible pressure on his shoulders. He steadied his hands and reminded himself of everything he had learned about focus and control. The last shot would not be about speed or bravado. It would be about patience, precision, and calmness under pressure. As he crouched, Cole felt a brief flicker of doubt, a tiny voice questioning whether he could succeed, but he quickly silenced it. He had faced challenges before, some even more dangerous, and he knew that doubt was the enemy of success. He focused on the bottle, measuring every angle and considering every factor, the height, the distance, and the slight wobble caused by the uneven rail. The saloon was completely silent now. Even the whispers had stopped. All eyes were on him, and even the air seemed to pause in anticipation. Breath. Suddenly, a small distraction occurred. A bartender tripped over a chair, sending a mug crashing to the floor. The sound echoed sharply, breaking the silence and startling many in the crowd. Cole's hand wavered slightly for a split second, but he took a slow, steady breath and refocused. He had faced unexpected distractions before, and he knew that staying calm in the moment was the only way to succeed. His gaze returned to the tiny bottle on the edge, and he adjusted his aim ever so slightly. Little Raven watched carefully, impressed by Cole's ability to remain calm under pressure. She had seen many men panic or lose focus when faced with challenges, but Cole remained steady. There was skill in his movements, yes, but there was also a strength of mind. She realized that this challenge was not just about hitting bottles. It was about character, about how a person handled pressure, distraction, and expectation. She found herself rooting silently for him, not because of the wager, but because of the courage and focus he demonstrated. Cole lifted the revolver one last time, his eyes narrowing on the smallest bottle. He measured the distance, took a deep breath, and focused every ounce of attention on the task. The crowd leaned forward, silent and tense. The noise of the saloon seemed to disappear, replaced by the sound of his steady heartbeat and the gentle tapping of the piano in the background. He felt the weight of the moment, the weight of the challenge, and the weight of the expectation of every person in the room. Then, with a smooth and precise motion, he fired. The bullet struck the bottle perfectly. It shattered into sparkling fragments that seemed to float in the lantern light like tiny stars. The crowd erupted in disbelief and excitement. People jumped to their feet, clapping, cheering, and shouting. Children squealed with delight, and even old Hank could hardly contain his astonishment. But Cole had done the impossible. Every bottle had been hit, every shot precise, and every moment of tension had been met with calm and skill. Cole lowered the revolver slowly, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline rushing through his veins. He looked around at the crowd, who were still cheering and applauding, but his attention went to Little Raven. She stood quietly now, her expression unreadable. She approached him slowly, her gaze meeting his. There was a respect there, a recognition of his skill, his patience, and his calm courage under pressure. It was not admiration for the wager or for winning a prize. It was respect for the character and discipline he had shown throughout the challenge. Old Hank stepped forward, still shaking his head in disbelief. "I didn't think it was possible," he admitted, laughing nervously.
Cole Dawson, you've done what no man I've seen could do. You've hit every single bottle." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Cole simply nodded, his eyes never leaving Little Raven.
But he understood that the true reward was not in applause or recognition, but in the calm confidence and integrity he had maintained through the challenge.
Little Raven spoke softly, her voice calm but firm.
"Rest. You have skill and you have courage," she said. "But remember, respect and freedom cannot be won by wagers or bets. The challenge has shown your ability, but it does not give you the right to claim anything beyond that." Cole nodded, understanding her words. He had taken the challenge, not to claim her favor or to win recognition, but to test himself and his abilities. Her words reminded him that true respect and honor came from actions, not wagers. The crowd began to disperse, talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. The legend of Cole Dawson and the Impossible Bottle Challenge would be told in Dust Creek for years to come. Children would retell the story to each other, and adults would share it around campfires and saloons across the frontier. Cole remained calm, helping to clean up the shattered glass with care and respect, knowing that the challenge had been a test of more than skill. It had been a test of patience, focus, courage, and character. Little Raven stayed for a moment longer, then smiled faintly. "You've shown me your strength and skill," she said quietly. "I respect that, perhaps." Cole bowed slightly in acknowledgement, understanding that the challenge had ended, but the lesson it had taught him and the respect he had earned would remain. First, he knew that the true test of a person was not just in winning a wager, but in the way they handled themselves when under pressure. And he had passed that test fully. As the sun began to set over Dust Creek, casting long shadows across the town, Cole stepped outside. The warm glow of lanterns reflected off the wooden buildings, and the air was filled with a sense of awe and excitement. He mounted Dusty, the black stallion, and took one last look at the saloon where the challenge had unfolded. It had been a moment of skill, courage, and focus, a moment that would be remembered long after the cheers had faded. He rode off into the twilight, knowing that the true reward was the knowledge of his own patience, discipline, and calm courage in the face of an impossible challenge. The saloon slowly quieted after the cheers and applause had finally died down. The townspeople of Dust Creek were still buzzing with excitement, talking in hushed tones about the incredible feat they had witnessed. Cole Dawson stood near the bar, the revolver now resting at his side. The shattered bottles were still sparkling in the warm lantern light, reminders of the challenge he had just completed. Though the applause and excitement swirled around him, Cole's mind was calm, focused on what had just happened and on the lesson it had taught him. Little Raven approached him, her movements quiet and measured. She had watched the entire challenge with a mix of curiosity, respect, and concern. When she reached him, she spoke in a calm voice, free of anger or arrogance.
"Cole," she said, "you have proven skill, courage, and patience.
But remember, the challenge may be over, yet respect and freedom are not prizes to be won. They are earned by actions and choices." Cole listened carefully, understanding the wisdom in her words. This was not a lesson about winning a wager or impressing the crowd. It was a lesson about life, about character, and about honor. Cole nodded respectfully.
"I understand, Little Raven," he said. "This challenge was never about claiming anything from you. It was about testing myself, my focus, and my patience.
I've learned that winning a challenge does not make a man better. It is how he handles himself that counts." His voice was calm yet firm, and there was an honesty in his tone that Little Raven recognized immediately. She could see that he had not only mastered the challenge, but had also understood the deeper lesson it carried. The crowd, meanwhile, began to settle into a more relaxed chatter. The children were excitedly pointing at the shattered glass and imagining themselves taking the challenge one day. The adults continued to talk about the courage and precision Cole had shown. Old Hank, who had set the challenge, came forward slowly, rubbing his beard in disbelief. "I thought no one could ever hit all 10 bottles, he admitted. "You've done what no man I've ever seen could do. You've earned not just applause, but respect." Cole acknowledged Hank's words with a simple nod, recognizing that while respect from others was meaningful, it was not the true reward. Little Raven stayed nearby, her eyes thoughtful. She had seen many men try to win her favor through strength, skill, or cleverness. Few had earned her respect. Cole, however, had shown more than just skill with a gun. He had demonstrated patience, calmness, and integrity. That mattered more to her than any wager or challenge.
"I respect your abilities, Cole," she said softly, "and I see that you understand the meaning of honor. That is far more important than winning a contest."
Cole considered her words carefully. He knew that the true reward of the challenge was not the applause, the astonishment of the crowd, or even the satisfaction of completing the difficult shots. It was the knowledge that he had maintained focus under pressure, stayed calm despite distractions, and conducted himself with integrity. This was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The challenge had tested more than skill. It had tested his character, and he had proven to himself that he could rise to the occasion. As the crowd began to disperse, talking excitedly about what they had witnessed, Cole and Little Raven stepped outside into the warm evening air. The sun had nearly set, casting golden and pink hues across the dusty streets of Dust Creek. The townspeople continued to chatter and laugh, recounting the incredible feat as they made their way home or to their evening activities. The saloon, now quieter and more peaceful, held the faint scent of dust, lantern smoke, and the remnants of spilled drinks. Cole mounted Dusty, his black stallion, which had been patiently waiting. Little Raven stood nearby, watching silently as he prepared to ride away. She could see the quiet satisfaction on his face, the calm that came not from victory alone, but from the knowledge that he had conducted himself well and met the challenge with skill and honor.
She smiled faintly, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. "You've shown great courage and skill today," she said.
I hope that whatever challenges come next, you face them with the same calm and patience you showed here. Cole tipped his hat in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Little Raven," he replied. "I've learned much from this challenge. Not just about skill with a gun, but about patience, focus, and respect. That is a lesson I will never forget." He felt a sense of peace as he rode Dusty slowly down the dusty main street of Dust Creek, leaving the saloon and the cheers behind him. The town would remember his name, the challenge, and the lessons it carried, but he knew that the true value of the experience was something he would carry within himself. As the town faded behind him in the growing twilight, Cole reflected on the challenge and the events that had led him here. He thought of the hours he had spent practicing in solitude, the discipline required to master skill, and the calmness needed to succeed under pressure. Berets well enchasted. More than anything, he realized that life itself was full of challenges, some small, some large, and that success often depended not on speed or luck, but on patience, focus, and integrity. The bottles had been a test, yes, but the lesson extended far beyond the walls of the saloon. Little Raven, meanwhile, watched the black stallion disappear into the distance. She thought about the quiet strength she had witnessed in Cole. Many men had sought to impress her through force or cunning, but few had demonstrated the combination of skill, patience, and integrity that she had seen today. She understood that respect could not be demanded or won through wagers. It had to be earned, and Cole had earned hers. In her own way, she felt a sense of admiration for the man who had risen to the challenge with calm courage and honor. The next morning, the story of Cole Dawson's incredible feats spread beyond Dust Creek. Bell merchants and cowhands recounted the story in other towns, speaking of the cowboy who had hit every single bottle in the impossible challenge. Children played at reenacting the shots, pretending to be sharpshooters like Cole. Adults debated whether anyone could ever match his skill and patience. Yet behind the excitement and retelling of the feat, there remained a quiet lesson for those who had witnessed it firsthand, that true strength came not just from skill, but from calmness, patience, and integrity under pressure. For Cole, life returned to its familiar rhythm. He rode across the plains, worked his cattle, and faced the challenges of frontier life. Breaths, the bottles, the crowd, and the respect he had earned remained with him. He knew that while applause and recognition were fleeting, the lessons of focus, patience, and honor would guide him in all aspects of life.
The challenge had been more than a test of skill. It had been a reflection of character, and he had met it fully. Little Raven continued her life as well, carrying the memory of the day and the lessons it taught her.
She recognized that true admiration and respect were reserved for those who demonstrated courage, patience, and integrity. Cole's actions had left an impression that would endure, not because he had completed a difficult challenge, but because of the way he had conducted himself through it. His calm courage had spoken louder than any wager, any applause, or any feat of skill. As the sun rose higher over Dust Creek in the following days, the town returned to its usual rhythm. Life moved slowly, as it always did in the frontier. But the story of Cole Dawson and the Impossible Bottle Challenge became a part of its history. Children learned it from their parents, travelers retold it in distant towns, and the lesson of focus, patience, and integrity became woven into the very spirit of the place. Cole's name was remembered not just for his skill, but for the courage and honor he had shown under pressure, a legacy far greater than any challenge could offer. And so Cole Dawson rode on, quietly, humbly, but with a confidence born from experience. He knew that life's challenges would continue, each requiring patience, focus, and courage. The bottles had tested him, the crowd had watched, and the lesson had been learned. True strength, he realized, was measured not by the applause of others or by the prize at the end, but by how one faced the challenge itself. With calm, patience, and integrity.